Please welcome your leader and the next Premier of British Columbia, Kevin Falcon.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you to John Yap and the entire party board and staff led by Kelly and Lindsay and all the workers who helped make this possible for a weekend of training and preparation and focus. And as you know, our theme is ready to go. Now, seeing the energy in this room and the training so many of you received today, I know that we are getting ready to go. When I see the record fundraising in Q1 following last year's record fundraising total, I know that we are ready to go. When I see the exceptional MLAs and candidates that you just saw on this stage, joined by their campaign managers and the volunteers in this room that are going to work day and night to make sure they go win in individual ridings across this province, I know that we are ready to go. When I attend a candidate announcement for Dave Sidhu in Abbotsford West, and there are over 600 people spilling out into the parking lot, I know that we are ready to go. When I see, thank you. When I see us attracting candidates like Dr. Claudine Storness-Bliss, a former department head at Surrey Memorial Hospital, or Dr. Michael Humer, the head of surgery at Kelowna General, and you couple that with Shirley Bond, a former health minister, leader of this party, and an effective health critic, and that's how we're going to make change in healthcare in this province. But my friends, British Columbia is at a critical crossroads. We used to be a province that had good reason to feel optimistic about the future. We were a province that would have a vision, and we were a province that would then fight for that vision and get it done. We were focused on results. We followed through on the commitments that we made. That's what we were known for. So what happened? Well, first, we've got very ineffective NDP leadership that only thinks about the next election, not the next generation. Just think for a minute about the three largest projects that are taking place in British Columbia right now today. There's Site C Dam, there's the twinning of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, there's the, of course, LNG Canada, both the pipeline and the incredible facility right there in Kitimat. These three projects alone represent almost $100 billion of capital investment, not to mention the tens of thousands of high-paying private sector jobs that are delivered as a result of these projects. And just imagine for a moment, because there are two characteristics that these three projects have in common. The first, all of them were initiated, started, and fought for by your BC United government. But the second thing is, all of them were opposed, strongly opposed, by the then opposition NDP and now the current NDP government. And I just want you to imagine for a second, what if the NDP were in power back then and none of those projects had gone ahead? What would have been the impact on local communities right across the north? What would the impact have been on Indigenous communities that are lifting their people out of poverty and creating new opportunities? What would it have meant if we did not have the leadership and the vision of prior BC United governments that helped get it done, and the leadership of people like Ellis Ross, the former chief councillor of the Haisla, that helped push it through with us. But what really should worry all of us is all three of those projects are coming to an end, almost at the same time. And as those projects come to an end, I have to stand before you and tell you that I'm sorry to say there are not three major projects behind them. In fact, there is not even one. And that ought to give us a lot of concern in this province, which is why we need experienced leadership to get back to investing and building for the next generation. Leadership that unites British Columbians from every part of this province, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, but united by the belief that we recognize that the majority of wealth generated in this province still comes from outside the Lower Mainland. And we have to make sure that we are investing back into those communities that generate those wealth for the benefit of all British Columbians. That's what we will do as a BC United government. But secondly, we have to recognize that British Columbia can no longer ignore the total lack of results that we've seen after 7 years of an NDP government. You know, as a former finance minister, I can tell you that budgets are kind of like a strategic plan. They really give you a sense of where government is trying to go in terms of the province. So let's just take a moment to recap the latest and the last budget of this NDP government that came out in February. Firstly, they managed to double the provincial debt to over $103 billion in 7 short years. Over the next 3 years, they're going to add a further $64 billion of new debt. And it's coupled with a provincial deficit of almost $8 billion. That is the largest deficit in the history of the province of British Columbia, at the same time that they've increased the bureaucracy by 42% over that same 7-year period. Now, it is a shame, my friends, but here's what ought to be most frightening for British Columbians out there. At the time of running up debt at such a reckless pace, at a time of spending so irresponsibly, we are getting the worst results we've ever seen in healthcare, in public safety, in the overdose crisis, in virtually every area of provincial responsibility. We're going in the wrong direction, not the right direction, and that's what has to change for British Columbians. Now, you go ahead. It lets me sip my water. You look at the front page of our newspapers and they talk about the exodus of people fleeing British Columbia. We haven't seen this many people departing British Columbia for places like Alberta and Ontario in over 2 decades. The last time it was this bad was the last time the NDP were in power in the 1990s. It's like a bad movie all over again. 70,000 more British Columbians left British Columbia in 2023 than came from other provinces. Imagine that. That's like the community of Vernon packing up and leaving the entire province. That's a bad result, David Eby and the NDP. These are not good results, but that is their track record. And the question for British Columbians in the next provincial election is a fairly simple one. After 7 years of NDP government, does anyone feel like we're better off today than we were a short 7 years ago? No. And my friends, it is time for change, but not just any change. It's time for bold changes. The kind of bold changes our party has always been prepared to embrace. Whether under Gordon Campbell or Christy Clark, we always focused on dreaming big and driving results. That's why we see those results all around us. Not just the big 3 projects that I mentioned earlier on, but the $800 million in the Kicking Horse Canyon improvements, the new William Bennett Bridge that we built up in Kelowna, the Canada Line, the Evergreen Line, the Port Mann Bridge, the South Fraser Perimeter Road, the Sea to Sky Highway, the Caribou Connector, in addition to the dozen hospitals that we built in every part of this province, from Fort St. John to Prince George to Abbotsford to Surrey. We get things done. That's who we are. So remember this. Remember this. Don't be distracted by polls or pundits, because they are almost always wrong. They told us and they tell us now that we're 22 points down from the NDP. Does that sound familiar to anyone in this room? Does anyone remember that we heard the same thing in 2013, 2 weeks before the election, 23 points down? All the smarty pants pundits were saying, oh, this election's over. The NDP are going to win this one for sure, until the gun went off for the election. And what happened? We won a majority government. That's what we do. In spite of the naysayers, and mark my words, we're going to do it again. Now, how will we do it? Well, we'll recruit great candidates to complement the unbelievable experienced team of top-notch MLAs that we've got. Whether it's unionized train operators, whether it's doctors, real ones by the way, whether it's lawyers, entrepreneurs, counselors, former mayors, exceptional women and men who are running for BC United because they know we represent the true coalition with the skill set, the resources, and the policies, and the solutions, not slogans, but solutions to get things done in British Columbia. You know, I am hosting town halls with thousands of British Columbians in every part of this province. I'm also doing telephone town halls recently with over 6,500 participants from Vancouver alone, over 3,500 in Surrey. But all of these town halls, whether by phone or in person, have told me one thing that is very, very clear. They're all defined by an incredibly strong sense of frustration in the public out there that realize almost nothing is working right in British Columbia today, and they are excited by our plan and our vision to fix BC, get us back on track, and get us leading the country again, not following the country. And you know, I've got a little bit of experience in both public life and the private sector, but I will say this. Trust in the common sense of British Columbians. Don't ever count out British Columbians. They're just not thinking about an election 6 months out. Do you know, I think about my own wife, Jessica, and I think about her friends, and I think about all the time that we spend just trying to juggle things, getting our kids to dance classes and coordinating drivers and all those. People aren't thinking about who's going to be in the next election or what party they're running for or which particular leader. They actually aren't paying attention, and I don't blame them, but they will. And when they do, as we get closer to that election date, and they start looking around and saying, you know what, I am not very happy with our healthcare system. I am not happy having to walk the streets, looking behind me, afraid I'm going to be attacked. I am not happy with seeing people, sad situations where people are left to their own devices without any proper support, being left in the streets to be exploited and abused. And they're going to look around for an alternative. And when they do, they are going to see the kind of great candidates that you saw up here on that stage. They're going to see the kind of leadership and the policies. They're going to say, we have a different plan for British Columbia, a plan built on a track record of getting things done in British Columbia. And that's what we're going to do together. We're going to get back to getting big things done in British Columbia. Now, my friends, in spite of the fact that when the NDP ran in 2017, one of their anchor commitments was that they were going to make housing more affordable for British Columbians. You remember they said, we're going to make housing more affordable. In fact, we'll build 114,000 affordable homes in 10 years. Well, how did they do? Well, we've ended up with the most unaffordable housing in North America, the highest average rents in all of Canada, and the 114,000 promised affordable homes that they were going to build in 10 years, we're in year 7 of that plan. They built just over 16,000, 20% of which were started by your BC United government. Now, here's the problem. At the same time that we've got the most unaffordable housing situation in the country, if not North America, they thought it would be a great time to increase carbon taxes by 23% on April the 1st. What an unbelievably stupid move. At a time when people are really struggling, is that really the time to hit them over the head with yet another significant increase? They've introduced or increased 32 new taxes since they came to power 7 short years ago. And they wonder why British Columbia is now the most unaffordable province in the entire country. Well, let me tell you what we're going to do differently. For starters, we're going to make sure that our young people and first-time buyers don't ever find themselves in the situation they are today, where over 75% of them believe they'll never own a home in British Columbia. I want you to know this, that we are going to eliminate the property transfer tax for all first-time buyers up to $1 million to make sure that they've got a chance to get back into housing. We are going to introduce a rent-to-own program so that first-time buyers can take rent payments and turn those into down payments, helping them get over the biggest hurdle in housing, which is that down payment. We're going to make sure we make public lands available on 99-year leases at $1 a year to the private sector and the not-for-profit sector, and in return we'll say to them, we want you to build rental housing with below-market rentals so our first responders and our workers can have a place where they can afford to live in communities right around this province. And we're going to eliminate provincial sales tax on all new rental and market housing. Why? Because when you build a typical rental project, you're talking about millions of dollars of just PST that goes into the cost of that construction. And as I always try to educate the NDP, none of whom have a private sector background in housing, by the way, I keep trying to say to them, if you want more affordable housing, you have to make it less expensive. You don't get to more affordable housing with blizzards of new taxes, new requirements, new regulation, new environmental rules. You've got to start taking costs out of housing so you can make it more affordable for first-time buyers in British Columbia. And that's why we also said, because we're a responsible party, we don't go around with slogans that make no sense, like we're going to axe the carbon tax when they can't. That'd be like me saying I'm going to axe the GST. You can't do it. Why? Because there's a federal carbon tax too. So what we say is no more increases in the carbon tax, and in fact, our BC-made carbon tax, we can remove it off of home heating fuel so that whether you're heating your house with natural gas, oil, or propane, you're going to get a break with a BC United government. And go ahead. And if the federal government does change and a future federal government does eliminate the federal carbon tax, then ours is going to, because we're not going to be the only jurisdiction in the country with a carbon tax. We find other ways that we can help battle the climate crisis. And you know, when we talk about natural resources, just think about this. We've got a premier and a government that are almost ashamed of the fact that we are blessed, and we are blessed with an abundance of natural resources here in British Columbia. We have a premier that 2 years ago when I was up at the Northern Resource Forum, he gave a speech and not once did the initials LNG even cross his lips. Imagine that. The single largest private sector investment in the history of this country, and he couldn't even find a way to mutter those initials. Well, let me tell you this. We are proud of our natural resource sector. We are blessed as a province that so many other jurisdictions around the world would give anything to have the mineral resources, the natural gas, the oil, and all the other resources that we got in British Columbia. And what's different about us is we don't mind working with our Indigenous partners and make sure that we realize the opportunity of raising them out of poverty, us out of poverty, and helping communities get back to a future where they can feel confident about the future of British Columbia because of our blessing of natural resources. You know, they come up with what they call a Clean BC scheme, and they actually left in a link that they apparently forgot about that went to an analysis that they had done on what their own plan would mean for the future of this province. And it's a shocking read. It actually showed, based on their own economic studies, that it would cost over 200,000 lost jobs in British Columbia, that it would shrink our GDP, that's like the economy, by 10%. Over the next 6 years. That is their plan. It's unbelievable. And you couple that with the uncertainty that they've created around the land base. The very fact that they were trying to sneak through changes to the Land Act that would have massive implications on 95% of public lands, and they tried to do it without any consultation. Sneaky Eby is at it again. And we exposed him, and we caught him out, and they had to defer it. But know this. This is part of a pattern. They're always trying to do things in a sneaky way. The dock management plan. People started to hear about this dock management plan. What the heck is going on in Pender Harbor? Why are the folks in Sechelt upset? They're upset because, once again, lack of transparency. Secret negotiations taking place without involving the communities. Massive impacts on private property rights. Sneaky EB was added again, and it's not the right way to do things. We'll do things in the open. We'll consult with British Columbians, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, to make sure the path of reconciliation is one we walk together for results that benefit all British Columbians. That's how we always did it, right here in British Columbia. And just remember this, at the end of the day, our guiding thought is this: what can we do as a province to help deal with the climate crisis? Where can we make the biggest contribution? Remember, British Columbia represents 0.17% of global emissions. We could shut down the entire economy of British Columbia, park every car, turn off every light, and sit in the dark, and it would still represent less than 2 days of emissions out of China. Or we could do something different. We could say, let's take something we have a lot of, which is natural gas, liquefy it at minus 160 degrees, ship it over to Asia, not just to China, but to India, to Korea, and now Europe, that are looking for sustainably and ethically produced liquefied natural gas to help them get off of dirtier forms of emission, like coal-fired power, and reduce global emissions by up to 50% by just transferring over to LNG. That is a greater that's like parking every car in the country. That's a great contribution that we can make in British Columbia to help get us to that green future that we all want to see. And just like we did under Gordon Campbell's leadership, we will encourage the private sector to come help us become a green energy powerhouse by investing in clean power, by investing in solar and wind and wave power, to ensure that we also get other opportunities to ensure that this new green future is one that is driven by knowledge, ingenuity, and technology developed right here in British Columbia, encouraged by your province. That's the kind of leadership that we've shown and will continue to show. And now, my friend, yes. And just think about our healthcare system for a moment. You know, Ian Payton, the MLA from Delta South, is here. And Ian and I both spoke to a gentleman named Lane French. And Lane, you may have heard about, suffered a stroke while driving through the Massey Tunnel. He managed, with everything twisting and turning all around him, managed to just barely get over to the other side. And falling out of the car, he managed to call 911, said, please, I need an ambulance, I'm having a stroke. And he waited, and he waited. And he got a call from his parents whose plane was landing. They were coming to visit him just by happenstance from the United States. And they were phoning, and he said, I'm having a stroke, and I'm just over at the Massey Bridge. And they said, my God, well, why aren't you calling an ambulance? I have been, they're not arriving. His parents landed the plane, got out, went through customs, went and rented a car, drove the car to the Massey Tunnel, got there to see their son lying there in distress, helped him into the rent-a-car, drove Lane French over to the Richmond General Hospital, where he waited for 6 years to be seen for a stroke. This is unacceptable in our British Columbia. We've got to change that. These results are totally unacceptable. We cannot have a situation where we just accept this as the new normal. We can't have a situation where an 88-year-old in Richmond falls and breaks her hip and is lying in the rain for 2.5 hours waiting for an ambulance to pick her up. It's not acceptable. 1 in 5 British Columbians cannot get access to a family physician. And when you go to a walk-in clinic, you're facing the longest walk-in clinic wait times in the entire country. 1 million of our friends and neighbors are on wait lists to see specialists. We've got emergency departments, especially in rural BC, that are closed more than they're open. What is happening to healthcare in British Columbia? I can tell you what's happening. It's got an NDP government, and they've got too many bureaucrats. They've got 73 vice presidents, all earning over $250,000 a year, and the only thing they've achieved is the worst outcomes we've ever seen in British Columbia. In Alberta, they've got 7. With a similar sized population. My friends, we got to get back to managing the system in the interests of patient care and make sure we focus on patients for the first time, not bureaucracy, patients. And I can't believe that we're in a situation where this government, of all the governments that constantly go on about the terrible, evil U.S. healthcare system. And what are they doing? They're sending our cancer patients down south to Bellingham to get basic radiation treatment. That's what's happened to our cancer care system that was once looked at when I was health minister in 2009, 2010. We were universally seen as having the best cancer care system in North America. Today, it's the worst in the country. Unacceptable for our patients and unacceptable for all of us that believe it's important we hold governments to account for results. And just understand this, that the cancer care chaos, the hallway medicine, the lack of doctors, the mismanagement of the system, all of this has to come to an end, and it will not change. I say this to all those watching us on television tonight. Know this, if you want more of the same, the NDP is your team. But if you want bold, courageous change that's going to actually shift us in a different direction and put patient care at the center of our healthcare system, BC United is for you. That is the change. And in the midst of a healthcare crisis, I want you to know this. Like every other jurisdiction in North America, we're going to bring back the thousands of fired, unvaccinated healthcare workers back into our system to help us deal with the crisis that we're facing right now. I called for that 2 years ago. I call for it today. We are the only jurisdiction in North America that continues to penalize these healthcare workers that we desperately need to help us get through this crisis. And also know this, that at a time when we've got a shortage of doctors, imagine 1 in 5 with no doctor. At a time when we've got that shortage, we've got hundreds and hundreds of what are called international medical graduates, most of whom are BC kids that have studied abroad in places like the Caribbean, Australia, Ireland, America. They want to come back. They're literally looking in the window saying, please let us come back and practice in BC, and they can't get through. Why? Because we've built up rules and regulations and red tape over the last 75 years. Well, I want you to know this. A Kevin Falcon-led government is going to take a chainsaw to those rules and regulations, and we're going to bring those kids home, and we're going to make sure they're looking after British Columbians. No excuses, just action. And when the government promises a new SFU medical program year after year after year, here's the difference. We support that too. The difference is we're going to get it built. Just like we opened up medical programs at the UBC Okanagan, in Victoria, in Prince George. We know how to get these things done. We'll get SFU up and running so that we can finally deliver workers right here in British Columbia, healthcare workers. Now, I want to touch on public safety because, you know, it's important to remember there's a direct nexus between what's happening on the streets today and government policy of this NDP government. Remember that David Eby, before becoming Premier, was the Attorney General for 5.5 years and also responsible for housing, by the way, for several of those years. And during his time as the Attorney General, we saw the police doing an amazing job, as they always do. The police arrest the criminals. They recommend the charges. And what happens? They get into David Eby's catch and release crime program, and they're out often the same day. No charge assessments where the Crown decides they're not going to charge these criminals that the police are recommending be charged. We're up 75% after 5.5 years of David Eby as the Attorney General. And that's why we've seen neighborhoods turned into chaos as a result of this catch and release. We've stood by. They've stood by. Well, we see 4 people a day in Vancouver attacked by random strangers. We see individuals, a young Asian woman, hit over the head with an iron pipe in Chinatown, and the individual's out the next day. It's unacceptable, my friends, and you have to know this. This is very important for you to know. That failure to protect our communities and community members from violent offenders is the most fundamental failure any government could possibly have. If we have to do one thing right, it's to protect our citizens from those that think the laws don't apply to them. And so just know this, that we are going to bring about change. You know, when I see a horrific situation like we saw in Kelowna, where a repeat violent sex offender assaulted an 11-year-old girl while their caseworker sat out in the parking lot in a car on their cell phone, that is unacceptable in our British Columbia. And when we see someone released when they shouldn't be, that stabbed several individuals at what should have been a wonderful celebration in Chinatown, that is unacceptable. But you know what I don't want to hear anymore? I don't want to hear the crocodile tears from David Eby or Mike Farnworth about how concerned they are, how disturbed they are, how white-hot angry they are. No, actually what we'd like to see, how about some results? How about some changes? How about a different outcome so that these folks are in jail where they belong and we're protecting the public that we're supposed to be looking after? And you look at their drug program, publicly supplied addictive drugs. You know, with the leadership of people like Eleanor Sturko, former RCMP officer in the front lines, we've been pointing out to the NDP that their reckless decriminalization program is not going to work. It's going to put people at risk. It's going to result in an explosion of drug use right across the province, and that's exactly what we've seen in parks, in playgrounds, in beaches. We're seeing drugs now, government-supplied drugs, being diverted and trafficked by criminal gangs. The government tried to deny it for many, many years, said that we were fear-mongering until they had to admit it. Even Bonnie Henry had to step up and say, yes, it's a common event, the diversion of drugs. But you know what the tragedy is? Those drugs are being diverted right to our kids in high schools, in colleges, and universities, and it's unacceptable. We see the RCMP making drug busts where they're not only getting the usual, big amounts of cocaine and fentanyl and all the other things, but also thousands and thousands of government-supplied drugs, pills, that they're trafficking to our kids. It's unacceptable. And not only is the explosion of drug use happening in parks, playgrounds, and beaches, but now in our own hospitals where doctors and nurses are having to put up with open drug use in our hospitals. This has to come to an end, and my friends, I want you to know this, that we are going to confiscate illicit drugs in hospital and ban weapons and drug dealings from our hospital and healthcare facilities the moment after we get into government. How did we get to a place where government doesn't care about open drug use on Sky Trains and in Tim Hortons and in all kinds of places, but God help us, if you're dancing in a Greek restaurant, they're going to fine you $10,000. That's called misplaced priorities, my friends. We got to get back to common sense leadership in this province again, and we will. And why and how will we do it? Why? Because we can't afford to be a society that pretends we care about the most vulnerable and just leave them to their own devices. It's not right. And so we're going to provide, instead of just free drugs, free treatment, because we want to help people get better. That's the difference. Our Better is Possible mental health and addiction plan is about looking after society's most vulnerable. It's about saying that we're going to take the Redfish facility that we started, the BC United government started out at Riverview, and instead of the 108 beds that are there today, we're going to make it 400. And we're going to open similar facilities in the north, in the Kootenays, in the interior, and on the island to make sure that we can take those with untreated severe mental health off the streets, involuntarily if necessary, because we want to look after their interests and get them into the proper care and attention that they need. That is a compassionate society. These folks need and deserve care, and I would hope that all of us would do that if any of us found ourselves in that same similar position. It is a tragedy to see people that cannot make decisions in their own best interests, that are literally crying out for help, and government's response is more of the same. It's not going to work. And that's why we'll also make sure that in addition to looking after our most vulnerable, we're also going to make sure we look after our children, because we're not going to do what the NDP do and allow guests to come into our schools and talk to our kids about how to safely snort cocaine. We're going to make sure that we go into our classrooms and educate our kids about the danger and how you can die from the kind of drugs that are on the streets today. Kids don't use drugs. There are all kinds of other opportunities that we have to introduce our children to, and we will. I always say when I talk to my colleagues that, not all crimes deserve jail time, but every crime deserves a consequence. And let me just assure you that a BC United government is going to make sure that there's consequences for bad behavior. This idea that people are just going to be released back into the community and be able to commit crimes with impunity is coming to a real fast end. And we're going to make sure that people feel safe once again in British Columbia. So, my friends, we have serious problems in this province that need to be tackled, and that requires a serious party to form government with the caliber of candidates that you saw up here today and the experience necessary to tackle these challenges directly. I'm running for Premier because I have a track record of finding real solutions to real problems, working with great colleagues. And I didn't return to politics to hang my hat on press releases. I'm back to get things done and to secure a bright future, not just for my daughter's future, but for your kids and your grandkids' future too. There is so much at stake in this election, more than any I can think of in recent memory. But I am confident that with the exceptional candidates that we're attracting, with our incredible leadership team of MLAs, and the bold policies that we're putting forward and will continue to put forward, we can rise to the challenge and deliver the change that the public so desperately want in British Columbia. Because I know this. I know that united and focused and committed to change, we can and we will fix this province and once again make us proud and confident to live in the best province, in the best country in the world. Thank you very much. Let's do this together. Thank you for coming out this weekend. I look forward to the election gun firing. Let's go win this election. Thank you.